Hello and welcome to the Psychic Stories podcast, encouraging conversations about mental health. Today I'm speaking to Heather Ryder. Heather is an anxiety specialist who helps high achievers suffering from anxiety and perfectionism find the peace and emotional balance they want and need so they can live their life with confidence, stability and ease. Heather, hello. How are you?
Hi, thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to our conversation today.
Likewise, thank you so much for being with us. So the goal today is to have an open and honest conversation about your mental health journey, to get some insight into the tools and techniques that have helped you along your way. And by discussing your journey, we hope to share and normalize these conversations, as often people are not alone in these experiences. Does that sound good to you?
Yeah, that sounds amazing.
Cool. Right. Well, very simply, we would love to hear about your mental health journey.
Well, it was quite a journey. So I suffered from high functioning anxiety for probably about 10 years. Looking back now, I can see things a lot differently now that I have actually gotten out of anxiety. But when I had anxiety, I had no idea that I had it. So for those of you who are familiar with high functioning anxiety, those of you that may not be, it's pretty obvious just from hearing it. It means you're highly functional in the world. And so I just thought I was stressed out all of the time. My mind was constantly going. I was a massive overthinker. And so I would be thinking about things that had happened in my past. And now I know that's called rumination. I would think about things over and over and over and play them over in my mind, sometimes for weeks at a time, thinking about how I could have responded differently or what I could have said differently or, perceived mistakes in those situations or conversations. And if I wasn't doing that, I was thinking about the future. And I was planning for any possible contingency that could occur, right? Like really worried about things that could happen and making all sorts of strategic plans for different scenarios. And so when you're living in that sort of state, right, you're never in the present moment. My mind was like on two sort of layers, is how I sort of describe it. Like I would look really calm and present to people when I was engaging with them. But then it was like this other part of my brain was doing the things that I just described. And I just was like in a heightened state all of the time. And so that's why I thought it was just stress. And, make this a short story. So I'm going to turn the entire podcast into my journey. When
That's
you're
fine.
living
That's what we want to hear about.
Well, when you're living in that constant state, your cortisol levels, your stress hormone is constantly elevated and your body is not designed to do that, right? It's supposed to be situational when you have cortisol or even adrenaline, and then it's supposed to go back down to a baseline. But when you're in a constant state of stress or anxiety, that's not what's happening. So basically I burned my body out. I was burning out my nervous system. And so eventually I got very sick with a severe autoimmune reaction. It may have been an actual autoimmune disorder. I don't know. I never had an official diagnosis. I just got really sick. And I knew that I really wasn't trusting Western medicine. I went to a couple of doctors at the very beginning and I was very dissatisfied with their approach, which was basically wanting to put me on antibiotics because of like the physical symptoms and, things that were happening to me. And I was like, that is not a solution to what's going on. So I started to just do a lot of research and honestly started to like kind of biohack my body to heal it. And I was taking such different approaches and was so like bottomed out. I knew things had to change. Like I couldn't keep operating the way that I was operating. And that approach and way of thinking was enough to, sort of quote unquote pattern break the way that I had been. And so that is how I really started to shift and change by basically becoming a different person and starting to consider things that I had never considered before and doing things I had never done before, some small steps, some very big steps. And that was my path out of anxiety. It took me about 1.5 years to heal my body. And probably, a bit longer to heal the anxiety, which by the way, through that entire process, I still didn't know that I had anxiety. I still didn't know that's what it was. It was actually after I didn't have it anymore that I discovered that's what I had. And it was eventually, some article, it's like the universe gave me a gift in some way of like reading this random article at some point about high functioning anxiety. And it was like, oh my gosh, that is what I was experiencing. That is exactly describes who I was.
And in terms of context, so this, because forgive my ignorance, so anxiety, I understand from a situational perspective. From a high functioning perspective, that's something which is, you are constantly in a state. So what would cause someone to be high functionally anxious for a long period of time?
Right. Well, I mean, I guess if we're going to get down to like the real base of it, it's an underlying thing is really perfectionism. So people who are high functioning are very goal oriented. They are ambitious. They are driven, which was me. I mean, I always excelled in everything that I did. I used to work in technology here in Austin, Texas, which is a big tech town. And, I have a master's degree. I had that master's degree by the time I was 26. And that was including taking a year off after high school and a year off after college. So that, I mean, lets you know, like I was always moving forward. I was always looking for the next thing that I needed to do and the next thing that I needed to accomplish. And there was perfectionism as an underlying driver in all of that. And so the people that I do tend to work with as an anxiety coach, by the way, are also people who tend to be very driven and are highly functional in the world, right? Just like I told you that people didn't even know I had anxiety and would mention that I was really calm. That's actually an indicator of high functioning anxiety. It outwardly to people, it looks like someone is extremely relaxed and even, that laid back sort of thing. But it's their inner mind that is propelling them to constantly be on. Like it's like a hamster wheel that's running in your head.
And I've got, I know some friends who have also high functioning anxiety, and like you said, the underlying driver being perfectionism, from my understanding from conversation with them, is that perfectionism is not necessarily always the deepest level. There's often some need associated with that, maybe some fear or something around kind of a very strong need to be validated. Like, from your perspective, did you that perfectionism is a manifestation of perhaps something underneath? Do you know what those things were and
Oh yeah,
how they drove
absolutely.
you
And
forward?
I'm glad we're now getting down into the next layer of this. It's like I have to describe things in sort of layers, like how it looked, what some underlying reasons were, and then underneath the perfection, you're absolutely right. This is true for high functioning anxiety or non-high functioning. There is the root causes that we have anxiety. And so there was the root cause of why I had perfectionism, right? And so my own personal story of that is I probably came out, first of all, just came out of the womb like in a certain way, right? There is some element of that, but my mother was very, very much a perfectionist. And when I was growing up, she used to say this phrase to me, Heather, do it right or don't do it at all. And I'm not talking about, she would just say that sort of flippantly, like, oh, do it right or don't do it at all. I'm talking about she would kneel down in front of me because I'm short, I'm a kid. And she would look me in the eye when I was about to do something and say, do it right or don't do it at all. And so because of my natural inclinations, I was like, oh, okay, I guess I'm going to do it right. And it wasn't just do it right. It was do everything right.
Yeah.
It's like, I mean, everything in my life.
And also, like, in terms of, because that's, I mean, for a child, so how old were you then?
Gosh, probably 7 or 8.
So like a 7 or 8-year-old, if you spoke to them and said, do it right, like, a lot of the time, I assume that the child wouldn't necessarily know what right is, and right is more about, okay, what other people say right is. So was there an element of, okay, I will do it right, but actually I'm doing it right not by my own standards, but because I don't understand them, I don't know what I've done is right. It's if my mum says to me, yes, that's right. So actually there's the really interesting link there between what is right, but also how other people validate that in your life. Is that,
Yeah,
does
that's a
that make
really
sense?
astute, that's a really astute observation, right? Because yeah, right, or quote unquote, right or wrong is a measure from an external point of view,
Mm.
right? And so, I mean, this is where I also am mentioning like some natural tendencies that I had. Luckily,
Mm.
I have always excelled in school. Like I just sort of conformed to the way school worked. It
Yeah,
made
it
sense
worked
to
for you.
me.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and it's like I got good grades. It's like, oh, you do the work and, and luckily I, had enough of a
Yeah.
good IQ to just sort of get things.
Mm.
But that is a measure of external validation, right? Like the teacher is like, "Oh, you did a good job. You got the gold star on here. You
Yeah,
got all the
yeah,
questions right." And it's like, "Oh, that's fun. Like I got the
yeah,
gold star. I'm going to keep doing that so that I can get the gold
yeah.
star because it feels great to like do this worksheet on a piece of paper well."
And then on the counter to that, if you didn't get the gold star, what would happen?
Yeah, I mean, there's this
It's that push, isn't it? It's a drive.
yeah, it's the push and the drive to want to do it well and
Yeah,
succeed. And that if you don't do that as a measure of standard, it's like you've failed. You haven't done well. And I mean, and going back to the silly little worksheets, I mean, this
mm,
is a common thing in elementary school. I mean, if I got one or two of them wrong, that's what you start to notice is what you didn't do right, not the
yeah,
overall, like, oh, I got the majority of these right. It's like, look, this wasn't perfect.
yeah,
I didn't, yeah, because I started to think that right was, you've asked some interesting questions. Like I'm even thinking back to how did I
mm,
know what was right or not?
yeah. It's hard,
And
right? It's
it's
very
like,
subjective.
it is very subjective, but it's like you're going for in any gauge where somebody can give you it's right, there are no mistakes.
Mm,
And so a lot of times things are very linear in the world,
yeah,
particularly in school, unfortunately. I do think, I mean, I'm 47 by the way, so I do
mm,
think that things have changed a lot. Luckily,
mm,
it's like recognizing there's different types of intelligence and that some people are kinesthetic and
yeah,
emotional intelligence. But back when I was a kid, it was like either you're learning this stuff or you're not.
yeah.
Yeah.
And I think it's interesting when I'm kind of thinking about one of a friend of mine who is high functioning, and I remember university he did exceptionally well at university. I mean, beyond anything that I'd ever seen or other people had ever seen. He got many awards and many prizes. But underlying it, I was always interested about what actually what actually drove him. And I always remember when he come out of an exam, and let's say at university in the UK, especially if you're in anything above about 70% is a first. That's basically exceptional. That's your top mark. Whereas he would look at it and go, I got 30% wrong. And if you look at it, and if you look at that on a 100-mark paper, that's 30 marks or 30 things that he got wrong. And he focused on those 30. He ignored the 70 things he got right. But that 30 would just play on him over and over. And I had this experience. I remember like going down to the swimming pool, and we kind of like we'll do some swimming lengths together. And halfway through, like we planned to do like 30 lengths or something. I remember seeing him at like length 20, and he just got out and walked off. And I said to him, I said, "What are you doing?" He goes, "No, this is not right. I need to, what I did was wrong, and I'm going to get better as a consequence. So I'm leaving now. I'm going to fix it." And I was like, wow, like to me, that was very odd behavior. But actually, if you do it in the context of like you've talked about, actually, you can see how that would play on his mind over and over and over and over again, and lead him to do something which might be perceived as a little bit odd in from my perspective. But actually, it's not at all from him. It's completely legitimate.
Yeah, that's amazing story that you brought in because first of all, I would say this guy wasn't trying to be an Olympic swimmer, right?
No.
He's just out there like getting exercise and trying to have fun. But in his life, he's like, well, if I'm going to do something, I have to do it right. And if there's if I have failed, it's like I have to remove myself from this at all because it's like this is no longer fun for me because I'm measuring myself. I'm guessing maybe perhaps were you swimming faster than him or something?
I'm a very, very slow swimmer, so
Okay.
very
So that
far
was
ahead of me. But it was him. It didn't matter who was around. He had these standards, and like you said, he was not happy. Like the way he looked at a test was that it wasn't what he did right, it's what he did wrong. And like you
yeah.
said, that drove you into what society, you've got lots of degrees, you've got to a high work ethic, but underneath all that, you're very stressed.
Yeah, it's like a lack of happiness because you're
Yeah.
just looking at all of the things that you haven't done or haven't done right. And that's why I, use that expression perceived mistakes,
Yeah.
because that's you've already even started alluded this. It's like things happen. They just happen, but then our perception of what happens is where that judgment comes from. And our outward life is very much a response to our internal state. And the way that any given person sees an experience is all, of course, driven by their subconscious and their subconscious beliefs. And so to get at your question before of like what else was under that, what else was under the high functioning anxiety, there was the perfection that comes from my mother's sort of cues, and then there was a natural propensity. It's called like being a natural genius, is like kind of a phrase where you just have natural like a competence in something. You don't know how, you just sort of like naturally are good at things. And then if things just come easily. Anytime there's some work that has to happen, sometimes that is like, wait a minute, I have to actually try at this. So like going back to the swimming thing, for some reason, there are people who are like amazing swimmers. Those are probably a lot of the time people who become Olympic athletes, although maybe not, maybe they just work at it really hard. But in his mind, he's like, wait a minute, I do everything right. And I'm doing this swimming thing that doesn't even really matter. But for some reason, I'm just not doing it amazingly well. And so there's the judgment that comes in of like, I have to take myself out of this because I'm failing at it, instead of having a growth mindset, right? It's like every time you swim the lap, you're getting better. He wasn't seeing that way. And that's the state I was in too. There wasn't a growth mindset. A lot of times there was a lot of victim mentality that I had, because I was very much responding to things in the world. And instead of seeing them from, well, how can I grow and learn from this? It was like, oh, well, so-and-so is wrong because they did that to me, or, very much blaming other people or circumstances for why I didn't quote unquote succeed.
Yeah. And at the same time, because if you are, like you said, you've got a natural gift for certain things, and you choose those things because they are, you're good at them, but also that it is also easy for you to do them. Like you said, when that challenge presents itself, and you say actually some things are difficult and you've got to work through them no matter who you are, then that can actually lead to some quite distressing feelings. And you mentioned earlier about, you said there's a lack of happiness. Did you feel that? Was there a lack of happiness in your life as a consequence of that?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say that was all the time. I don't want to make it sound like I was never happy. I was. It was just also that, how I talked about those dual layers of not being present. It was like when you get taken out of the present moment, you can't be happy because you're not like connected to other people. And so I would sometimes feel really distant from people. And this would happen particularly after I became a mom, of like not feeling like I was connected to my kids. It's difficult to describe, right? Of being like, oh, I'm in this state of hypervigilance of what can go wrong, or what are they doing wrong, or what am I doing wrong? And so sort of missing those moments with them because my mind wasn't really with them.
Yeah, I get that.
Yeah.
And actually, I appreciate that. I've got a small daughter, and not from a kind of like you talking from an anxiety perspective, but I can certainly appreciate there are feelings that go when you're meant to be with them, and they're focusing on you, and you're there to give them the attention that they want and they need, and basically you're there to have fun with them. Sometimes that distraction, or when your mind isn't in that present moment, can lead to some quite guilty feelings, and I've certainly found that is, it can be quite complicated. And do you find that now being a mum, and obviously you spoke earlier about your mum as well, you're very aware, I assume, of of the high functioning anxiety in your life? And have you made a kind of an effort to almost break that pattern and break that cycle, so that, for example, your kids aren't necessarily, maybe understand things or perceive things in a different way that won't lead to how you felt?
Yeah. So, I mean, going back to when I would say the high functioning anxiety was really, really bad, before I got sick and then a little bit after I got sick. This is something I share with people a lot. I would scream at my daughters, and I don't mean just yell at them. There's a difference between yelling and screaming. I'm talking top of my voice, screaming at them over completely stupid things. I mean, even if it wasn't quote unquote stupid, that would have been wrong. But I recognized when I was doing that, it was like I was not even in myself. It was like I was just screaming at them, and I would feel insanely guilty after I was done, because they'd be crying and I'd be like, oh my God, I just freaked out over like the fact that they put a bunch of clothes from their closet that weren't actually dirty in the hamper.
Yeah.
I mean, it was just like flipping my lid. And then I would vow to myself, like, Heather, what are you doing to them? That's abusive.
Mm.
And then I would promise myself, well, I'm not going to do that again. And sometimes I would go for weeks without doing it. And sometimes it would only be a couple days, but I would keep doing it. I would get sucked back into it again. And I knew I was ruining my relationship with them. I knew that. You can only say you're sorry so many times to somebody before they're like, I'm out.
Mm.
And it is becoming dysfunctional. And so as I healed and changed, the yelling, screaming at them stopped. And kids are resilient, of course, and they recognized that I was becoming different. Like they could see that, they could feel that. And so then I started apologizing really for the way that I had been, and understanding myself more, and telling them, this is what was going on with me. This is why I was doing that. And having real conversations with them. And they accepted my apology because they could actually feel that it was authentic, versus after I did it, where I'd be like, oh my God, I'm so sorry I did that. It's very different than when they could feel an energetic and emotional shift in me. Mm. And then they started to trust me more, because then they were like, well, wait a minute, this isn't happening again. She seems different. Mm. And so no parent is perfect. Like I still do things sometimes where I'm like, kind of screwed up on that one. But now we have, they're in high school, by the way. So we have different conversations now. Yeah. When I'm referring to this time, they were both in elementary school. So a lot of years have elapsed now, but there is this recognition that comes from them and comes from me of like, this was a bad period in my life, and I have changed, and I have reestablished trust with them, because I took ownership of the way that I was being, and they see that I am different now. And so I've built up credibility again with them now that I didn't have before.
Yeah. And have you found, like you said, like you're talking about breaking that cycle, like I assume that you haven't said to them, do it right or not at all. That's something which I assume for you in your life is probably has shifted.
It has shifted. I mean, when they were little, of course, my perfectionism was being like forced upon them. Mm. But there's been an evolution in my parenting where, I'm giving them a lot of freedom in ways to pursue what's interesting to them, and not making them think that they have to conform to like ideals and standards. I want them to apply themselves to things that they think are interesting. And I do want them to do well in school, just because a lot of school is learning how to learn. It's not about getting the grade. It's like, maybe you're never going to use algebra again in your life, but that uses a part of your brain that you don't normally use. So you're developing things. And also there's a resilience that comes when you have to try, right? And this goes back to that like unconscious competence. That's actually where the best growth was when you don't know how to do something and you just keep trying until you get something. If that comes from a genuine place of like, wow, this is interesting. I just want to do this and pursue this for myself. And I've seen that with my daughters. Like my younger daughter is a dancer, and this is something very simple, but she's not naturally flexible. And so she has to be able to do the splits. And she spent months of her life working on getting her splits every single day, stretching until she could do it, because she decided she wanted to do that. I didn't say, you have to learn how to do splits. She was like, I want to do this. And that's this moment that I could see where she was like, she would like check in with me. She's like, I'm this far away. And then, and then like, I'm down to like only having an inch left. And then she did it. And like that mastery of something is really powerful when you decide that you want to do it, coming from a place of like, I want to nail this for fun, as opposed to like, you have to do it because somebody's telling you do.
Yeah. And that must be amazing for her as well, because you said that there seems to be, there does seem to be a correlation between when you like, you take, you've got your gifts, like you said, your natural genius, you're good at things, but just working on things where you're not necessarily good at, but you love doing. Like you said, your daughter's dance, you said, like, flexibility is part of it. There'll be people who are naturally flexible, but she isn't, but she loves it so much, she's going to work at it. And that is so satisfying, isn't it? When you do try really hard at something and you love it and it pays off.
Yes. And I would also say the flip side of that is, especially for people with high functioning anxiety, because if you have high functioning anxiety, you want to please yourself and everyone else. And there's this responsibility and accountability that comes with that, and not wanting to let people down and not wanting to be seen as like somebody who gives up. I also think it's really important to know, like, you can try something and then decide you don't like it.
Yes.
I tried it and I'm like, it's not that I'm a quitter. It's just like, I just don't want to do this anymore. I tried it and I've recognized like, oh, that isn't a good fit for me. I think this is a funny story. And I've never said this on a podcast. I'm actually going to say this. When I graduated from college, my mom bought me a ticket to fly to Europe. Like, that was her gift for me. And I was backpacking around Europe and I was going to stay for a month. And after about 3 weeks, I was like, I'm really tired of staying in these hostels. Like, I'm really tired because I didn't have very much money. Right? It's like, I'm really tired of like eating yogurt and apples from the grocery store.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it was like, and schlepping this heavy backpack around. And I was like, I actually just think I want to go home. I felt like a total failure for wanting to go home. I mean, like, the admission to myself of wanting to leave, I felt like I was giving up and quitting. I had to call my mom and my roommate because somebody needed to like pick me up from the airport. And I also just wanted them to know, like, I'm coming home early, because I had a roommate. I can't just like show up and, and like open the door. She'd be like, wait a minute, like scared. And I remember like having to, like, you just really get a lot of power behind having to call them, because I felt like I was quitting something and admitting defeat, of like, call them and be like, I'm coming home early
because I'm not enjoying it, or
it
for
was
some
a
other
freaking
reason.
trip. It was not like I was quitting anything. It was like a vacation and I decided to come home early. But I felt like I completely failed something and was letting people down and letting myself down by wanting to come home early.
And that's that thing about that, that very strong, powerful feel about letting other people down. It's very, 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 very powerful. And like you said, like, just that simple act of going on a holiday, like it's that anxiety was pervasive throughout your life. It wasn't just work or studies or school or whatever it was. It's everywhere, isn't it? It's every single thing you do to you is a goal, or it is something that is to be achieved. And in order to be achieved, let's try a holiday, like you said, your mum's bought your ticket and you're going to fulfill that criteria which you have set in your mind. It goes back to that idea we were talking about earlier about, that subjective nature of what is right and perfectionism. And like, in your mind, to be perfect, you would have to have done that and achieved that. But because you didn't, you feel like a failure. And I'd be interested to know, like, because you said in the context of you've got now children at high school, and a lot of this started when you were 8 or so. So that's, you're living with this for, 20, 25, 30 years. Is that something which, I mean, it must be very hard to change your mindset from a mindset of, 30 years to something which is, like you said, is what you describe as more of a growth mindset. I'd be interested to see, previously, when you were in that kind of period of high function anxiety, like, what did perfection look like to you? And then now, what does perfection look like? or does perfection even exist to you?
I guess I would start with the now, like there is no perfection, right? Like that's an illusion.
Mm.
So I would say that that's the big difference now is if somebody even says to me like, oh, I'm a perfectionist, when they say that, I'm like, because people will say that like it's a badge of honor. I hear that a lot, like, oh, I'm a perfectionist. And I'm like, oh gosh, girl, like you don't want to say that. Let's like get you out of that mindset. Like that's the worst place to be in.
Mm.
And so I guess maybe I don't understand your question about what did perfectionism look like to me before.
Well, yeah, I mean, like when you were, let's say you were at, school or at university or at college, and you looked out and you were like, this is the life, this is the life, this is the person that I am trying to be. Like, I don't want to let down people in this way, or I'm going to achieve this in order to do that. What did that look like for you in life? Was it like lots of degrees, lots of jobs, lots of friends, lots of money, whatever it was? And
oh yeah, okay. Yeah, because perfectionism would be defined differently by different people, right? So, I mean, for me, it was definitely education. And I will say, as you know, as a side note, there's not very many people in my immediate family that have graduated from college, and my mom actually had me fairly early in life and dropped out of high school to have me. And so I felt like education was my way out, right? It was my way to have a steady job, and it was my way to make sure that I would be financially stable and secure. And so I definitely felt like I needed to for sure graduate from college. Like that was at a minimum to make my life, quote unquote, like worthy of being successful. Is like I have to have a college degree. I think there was probably a lot of elements of physical health. I actually do love to work out, by the way. It's like a good stress reliever, and I think it's fun. But I mean, that was something as well, is like you need to be healthy, whatever that means. It's like eating well or maintaining a specific weight. I probably would have said that that was perfection.
Yeah.
I also would have probably said that you're spending your time, your free time, on goal-oriented pursuits.
Yeah. Rather
Like
than
I've always,
relaxation.
yeah, like it's as opposed to, which is really funny because I love to read, but a lot of times I also would set goals about how many books I was going to read a year.
Yeah, I get that. And how many pages even you're going to read in a night, right?
Yeah, like all of that sort of stuff. There's always a goal. And I still am very goal oriented. I mean, and I think that that's okay. But as an example, last year, 2020, I had set a goal of 50 books, and I've only read that many in a year once.
50.
And it's obviously a lot because it's basically almost a book a week, right? Like you got,
yeah, that's a lot of reading.
That's a lot. And so I was like, okay, I haven't done this for a really long time. I'm going to do this again. And the pandemic hit, and I was looking at the news, especially at the beginning. Like I've never looked at the news, right? And it's like normally I would read at night, and I wasn't reading at night. It was like I'm looking at Twitter. I'm, just following the news for at least 6 weeks really heavy. And I got derailed from my book challenge. And I was like, I didn't maintain my pace. And I was like, it's going to be really hard for me to recoup. Before that would have been like a disastrous failure.
Yeah.
I didn't need it. I didn't. And I knew, I was like, it's going to be really hard for me to get to that goal. And I was like, whatever, I didn't make it. It was like, yeah, I just didn't even care. I was like, I got pretty far. I still actually read a lot of books in spite of that, but it was like, didn't do it. No biggie. Nobody cared but me. It wasn't like, who cares?
And like you said, like taking away, your way away from the present moment, like your goal was, let's say, to read 50 books. Like it in some respects, taking time to enjoy those books and actually understand what you're reading, or if it's fiction, like getting involved in the characters, or if it's fact, understanding some, I don't know, a historical event or a new idea or theory. It's if what's on your mind is that I must finish this book, I've got to get on the next one because I've got to keep up with my pace, then you're kind of missing the point of reading, right?
Yeah, absolutely. If you're just plowing through them. And I will say, by the way, I'm not a speed reader. I mean, I know people who read a lot faster than I do. I'm like, how did you read that fast? And they're retaining it. But yeah, you're right. I mean, it just gets to the point of like plowing through it to get done, which doesn't mean I'm not enjoying them, but you're right. There's not an ease about it if you're just having to keep up a pace and worried about, did I fall behind and now I have to quote unquote catch up.
Okay, and also, and because I've had this situation, I want to challenge you on this. If you were reading a book, so let's say you were on your milestones, you were hitting, right, I'm on book 30. It's 30 weeks of the year, I'm on track. If you were really not enjoying that book, would you finish it?
Oh, I actually would stop things.
Oh,
So
would
yes,
you?
that is something that the old Heather, I would have finished a book because you finish books that you start.
Exactly.
Swear. Yeah. But now I'm like, no. I mean, I would say it would probably depend on how close I was to being done. So if I was,
Yeah.
75 or 80%, I
Yeah.
probably would finish it. But I definitely give up books now because I recognize, well, I can't even finish this anyway, because it's like, it's reading time. And then I'm
Yeah.
like totally not doing it because I'm like, wait a minute, I don't want to read right now because I don't like that book.
Yeah.
So then I just stop.
And you find out, because it's interesting, you talk about being goal orientated before and after, and there's a lot of research and literature which says goal orientation is a very good thing, but like you said, and I acknowledge that being goal orientated can also be a very bad thing as well. How do you get that balance?
Yeah, I do think that that is a great question. This is why I guess I said that a few minutes ago, is I don't think that being goal oriented is bad. It's what's underneath the drive that
Yeah,
matters.
that's so true.
And so I set a book goal of 50 books because I like to read. I wasn't trying to do something that was just like, God, I hate this. Right. And there are certain, physical activities that I'll do. And it's like, oh, I'm just going to use this as an example. It's actually not even real, but like, let's say I wanted to be able to do 20 consecutive burpees.
Yeah.
It's because I think that's fun.
Mm.
Right. And so if we're doing things because we think we have to, there's a big difference between that and doing it because it's like, oh, I'm interested in that and I'm going to pursue that because it sounds interesting. But again, I also said this, it's okay to let something go, like to try it and be like, well, I tried and that's how I discovered I actually don't like this. Like as an example, I have a client right now, because of the pandemic and everybody's home, people were starting gardens.
Yeah.
So she's like, oh, I guess I'm supposed to start a garden. And she did. And she's like, I don't even like this. But then she's like beholden to going out there. And it's like, you don't have to have a garden just because your friends have a garden. Like you tried and just like, you're not trying to feed your family with those cucumbers you're growing. Just let them die.
And actually, if I was thinking about this because we haven't got a garden, but we're moving to a place with a garden. And I was thinking, oh, I'd like to be a bit more sustainable. If you start to think through the logic of okay, I've got a garden, I must do something with it, rather than do I enjoy doing it. If you try and work out how many potatoes or how many cucumbers you actually need to actually put food on your table, you need to be in that garden pretty much 12 hours a day, and you need a very, very, very big garden. And I think you kind of raise that good point, that when you think about the logic and you challenge yourself why you're doing something, if you can't come up with a good reason why, then you should abandon what you're doing. If you can come up with a good reason, I'm doing it because I'm enjoying it, or I love this, I love that, or I'm doing this to earn money for put food on my table, whatever it is, that makes sense. But there's so many things we do which is always about, oh, because that person, I want to validate myself against that person or whatever, or I've got something deep within me. But actually you can, there's something very simple. Ask yourself why. And if you can't answer it, then it's probably that you don't really like it, or you don't, you're not interested in it.
Yeah. And I think that's great. That's perfect. And I mean, I will say there is something sometimes about trying something new.
Yeah, true.
Just because we fall into patterns and routines, and maybe sometimes you need to get out of your comfort zone a
Very
little
true.
bit.
Yeah.
Like go back to maybe exercise as an example. Like maybe a few years ago I tried running. I could never run and I was like frustrated. I was like, how come I can do other things but I can't do this? And so I sort of decided I'm going to try running. Like I'm actually going to invest some time into this. And I will tell you, at first I hated it. I mean, I was like, why do people do this? And so but then I have some friends who are runners. I asked for some tips. I was like, how come I can't run more than this? And, and then they gave me some tips and I was like, okay, I'll try what they said. I still don't love running, but I can do it now. And that to me was a goal where I was like, I want to see if I can start to be able to run a mile. And then I could. And then I was like, okay, I'm going to keep this up and see, can I just do it a little bit more? And there's other exercise that I love more, but I don't hate it now. And when I'm out there, I actually do feel a sense of accomplishment because it took a lot for me to be able to run
Yeah.
a mile.
But yeah, and I appreciate that. That's amazing that you've done that. But then my question is, okay, why are you running then?
Yeah, and part of it is because I like to, and this does go back to the question of underneath it. I actually like to see what my body is capable
Yeah,
of.
yeah,
Yeah, for me, that's
that's a valid
fun.
answer, right? I'm pushing myself. I want to see what I'm made of.
Yeah. I'm not doing it because somebody says like, oh, you have to do this. No one has ever said that to me. It was just like, I just want to see, can I do this? And it also, as I mentioned, didn't make sense to me. Like, how come I can do this other kind of exercise really well and I can't do this? I'm still using my body. And it was like,
Mm,
well, I want to master this a little bit. I was like, I know some people who run marathons and I'm just like, I don't even understand how
yeah,
you do that. Like
yeah.
I cannot eat, like 3 miles for me is like, oh my gosh, somebody give
Mm,
me a medal. So I'm not trying to run a marathon. I actually don't ever want to do that. That to me sounds like absolute torture, but it is pretty fun to get out in my neighborhood. And there's things that I've come to appreciate about it is
yeah.
like, if I get up before everybody else and I'm out there running, and like I see animals sometimes that I would never see,
Mm,
because you don't see raccoons in the middle of the day, right?
yeah.
Because they're nocturnal. So it's like, I've gotten to see things sometimes out running that I never would have experienced. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, and I think that really is in advocates for that kind of point of view. It's like, try everything once, like, or a few times, and often you might be pleasantly surprised that there's things that happen on that journey. Like you said, running, you might go out running in the woods or whatever it is, and actually realize that actually I don't like running for the running, but I really like the woods, or I really like the nature. I like not being in the gym, whatever it is. Like for you, you like seeing the animals that you wouldn't have seen necessarily. There are often some very surprising things when you do try something that you would like, that you would never have known about before. So I completely agree with you, like going through that process, but then at the same time, like if there's a negative driver, or like you said with your book example, if you're not enjoying something and you've persevered, you've read half the book and you're like, do you know what, this is for me, this is just isn't working, it's boring, then it's actually takes quite a strong person to go, I'm done. I'm done. I'm gonna try something else, because we haven't got enough hours in the day, right? Like there's no point in just pursuing a million and one things and feeling bad, feeling bad about it. What we're trying to do is trying to get some more positivity in our lives.
Yeah. And you're also mentioning that spring, like you talking about this, because we're talking about sort of simple things like reading or some exercise, but there may be somebody listening who's really doing something that is major in their life.
Yeah,
Like we all know this, like people who go to become a lawyer or a doctor because
yeah.
their family expected it of them.
Mm,
That's so much work and so much money. And they're like, God, I hate this profession. And
mm,
they're doing it because there's some external thing that is telling them to. It's not because they love the law or they love medicine. And
yeah.
and then it is fortunate when they actually realize that and give that up, because I have known people who are like, I tried this and then I recognize, like, I don't want to be a lawyer. Like, I
Mm,
hate this. And that does take a lot of courage to
yeah.
say, this is not me. I cannot do this for the rest of my life.
And you mentioned earlier, when you were right at the beginning, actually, I think when you introduced your story, you spoke about kind of alternative approaches that were not there weren't antibiotics or medicinal. We'd love to hear a bit more about that and what actually worked for you.
Yeah, so I definitely started trying some very unusual things that I had never tried before. And this at first isn't going to sound like it would heal your body, but it did
Mm,
in some ways. I started journaling. I had never journaled anything before, and I just felt really inspired to start writing down affirmations that sounded to me like ways of thinking and mindset things that I wanted to approach. And it was actually really cathartic for me and brought up a lot of emotions when I would write down these things. So
mm,
that was actually my first step into something different. And then when I started doing that, I also, you know, I really am very spiritual now. I would not have described myself that way a number of years ago, but it's like books started coming to me that were very spiritual in nature. Like, you know, somebody would mention something like my chiropractor I remember he told me about this book and I was like, I think it's called The Surrender Experiment. And so then I was like, oh, I'm going to go read that book. And so I did. And that really, you know, started shifting my mindset. And then this was actually something that was really, really powerful that transformed my life. I went and had an energy healing session. I wound up having multiple, but Reiki in particular, which when I heard about Reiki, I didn't know what it was. And it sounded to me like some sort of massage, you know, because it's like Asian, like, oh, is that ashiatsu or something? I didn't know what it was. And I literally had no concept of like our energetic body and our energetic system. And so I just basically booked a session with this woman that lives in town because she had a lot of great reviews online. And this was very uncharacteristic of me. I did not read anything about it. I really didn't even know what I was going to do. And so I like show up at this lady's office and I was like, yeah, I've been really sick for a while. And, you know, I have a lot of inflammation, and told her some stuff. And I was like, yeah, I'm just here to like try this. And I didn't ask her any questions. And it's like a massage table that you lay on, even though you're not getting a massage. Right. And so I just basically hopped up on her table. I was like, let's do this thing. And I had just a mind-blowing experience. I mean, it was like I was seeing colors and feeling all these really unusual sensations in my body. And when I sat up, when she was done, I felt loopy. Like I just felt like, I can't even describe it. I was like, oh my God, I don't even know what happened. And that's when I actually asked her, I think this is so funny. I look at her and I go, who are you? I was like, what did we just do? And then she tells me the things she probably tells newbies at the beginning. And I couldn't even concentrate on what she was saying. I was like, I can't even like hear this lady. And she gave me a sheet of paper, which was great, about, you know, kind of what happened. And I read that later, but that was a really powerful experience for me. And when I was asking her, who are you? I did say like, wait, how did you wind up doing this? And she told me some of her story. You know, she used to have a corporate job and all of this stuff. And then that got me thinking. I was like, wait a minute, she's like a quote unquote normal person. If she does this, anybody could do this. And so I just very quickly became a Reiki master. It's a series of classes that you go through. And that really helped start to unravel a lot of those core limiting beliefs and core subconscious stuff that I had going on, that you and I have you know, talked about, that was underneath the anxiety.
And it's interesting you mentioned Reiki as well, because I know a lot of people swear by it. It's not necessarily considered in the kind of in the medicinal profession, but more of an alternative approach. But I think what the important thing is here is, like you said, like you've tried something where other methods have failed and it's worked for you. And that's really important, right? You at the time you had no idea why it didn't work. It was like, you know, I assume it was, you know, like having a spiritual experience, just like what has just happened. And you've now gone on this journey to understand a little bit more about it. But I mean, I'm certainly of the view that there is a lot more outside of what is known as the traditional sciences. And I'm a scientist by my nature. So I'm wedded to science. However, I'm very, very conscious that there are other things going on that we don't understand, and actually opening yourselves up, giving things a try is really, really important, because you don't know what is going to heal you. And you found, like you said, because I'll be interested just in our final kind of 10 minutes, just to understand a little bit more about, you know, Reiki and actually how it works from your perspective.
Yeah, I'm definitely happy to talk about that, but I don't want to gloss over what you just said, because it's actually really important, is that if we are trying to heal ourselves from the place at which we have always been, we're not going to find any growth. You can't change yourself from your current state. You have to do something different. It's absolutely fundamental. And that different thing, that's why I mentioned the journaling. That's so simple. But for me, that was actually something I had never done before. Right. And I like how you talked about science. I mean, I would never have described myself as a spiritual person before at all. It was very like science based. But when I started to think, well, things that I've been doing before haven't worked
Yeah.
and I've got to try something new. That alone, that is a huge mindset shift to be
Yeah.
willing to consider to try something new and see what happens. That breaks you out of patterns, right? And so, yes, I happen to find something that works for me. And you just said that. It's just people need to try and
Yeah.
find something that works for them. And it quite often is doing something you've never done before.
Yeah. And actually, if that thing that works for you, some people say, oh, I don't believe it. It's not, you know, it doesn't work for me. Well, that doesn't matter. Like, you've got to find what works for you. And if what works for you is something completely obscure, but it works and it makes you able to grow or maybe develop or become more positive, then my view is stick to it, right?
Yeah, because it's working for you. I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like you don't need somebody else's permission. Like this is your
No.
life and your health and your mental health. So, I mean, you know, forget them. But I mean, it's to very briefly describe Reiki. I mean, it's an energy healing modality, and that sounds like a bunch of, you know, words strung together, but we are energy. Human beings are energy, right? We're a bunch of atoms bouncing around, and we have an energetic field that surrounds our body. If you put your arms out from side to side, it's a radius about that far around. And I think most people have had this experience. I'm going to pause for a moment and say, well, if you're listening to that and you're like, I don't even know what she's saying. A lot of times, everybody has had this experience. You walk into a room and two people, like a couple, have been arguing, right? And you just know, and it's like, because it feels really weird and you're like, awkward, and you like turn around and walk out of the room. You're really picking up on their energy, right? And the energy that they're sort of emitting through their emotions. That's how you could feel it. And so we have this energy field, and our body is part of our energy system as well. And within that energetic body, we can store past experiences, past emotions, past traumas. They kind of get like embedded within your energetic system. You could just think of them as like, you know, little blocks that are sitting in there. And so energy healing is just a way to free that up and move that out of your energetic body so that it's not there anymore.
Okay. See, and for you, did you find that experience, so from your first session where you said you were experiencing lots of colors, and it sounds like from that you know, perspective, that you were, you know, there were some blockages there which the person who was practicing on you was able to identify and able to move around or to get rid of. And how long did it take you in terms of your course, that kind of Reiki kind of course? How many, you know, sessions did you do before you started to say, okay, actually I'm feeling really, really good now?
Yeah. And it was so fast for me. I mean, I really was, you know, I know this now from a spiritual perspective, like I was very ready for that. And so that session was so powerful. I went back and saw her maybe 2 weeks later.
Yeah.
And then saw her again maybe 2 weeks after that. And then that's when I decided to start taking the classes.
Yeah.
And I will say, from a physical body perspective, it actually, I really started to notice my healing accelerate after I had those sessions. I mean, it was noticeable to me that I was progressing more quickly than I had before.
And I think it's just so important to, you know, to stress that, like, it was a transformative experience for you, but an experience that you'd never even thought you'd ever entertained before. But it was so transformative that you realize actually this profound change is turning into something really positive, and therefore I am going to continue on it. And now, like you said, you're a Reiki master, who is now, and I assume, I mean, maybe a very naive question, but can a Reiki master perform Reiki on themselves?
Yes, that's such a
Okay.
great question. Yeah, when you are channeling energy healing, you can channel it for yourself. This sounds so weird to say. It's hard to describe, but it's like, yes, I can give energy healing to myself because it's not coming from me, it's coming like through me.
And that's I suppose that's not an intuitive concept to understand, from if you haven't heard of, let's say, these energetic fields necessarily before. And Heather, I just wanted to say, like, I know unfortunately we have to wrap up now, but I just want to say thank you so much for your time. We've gone from when you were 7 years old, high functioning anxiety, and going through talking about parenthood, and now talking about your anxiety coaching and also Reiki as well, which is brilliant. It's an amazing conversation that's taken several turns. And I just want to thank you. Say thank you so much for your time and your insight into some areas that perhaps we haven't heard before.
Yeah, you're so welcome. It has been a really amazing conversation.
Cool. And thank you to everyone listening. You can subscribe to us on most major podcast platforms, YouTube, Apple Podcast. Just search for Psychic Community and Psychic Stories and we'll pop up. And please do give us a rating if you like the show. And check out our free Psychic app for iPhone and iPad, a collection of interactive exercises, tools and tips to help you boost your mental well-being. The app enables you to build a personalized well-being toolkit to help you deal with life's ups and downs. It includes exercises like we've talked about with Heather today, journaling, breathing exercises, meditations. Just go on our website, www.sidekick.org.uk, and click the download now button in the header to take you to the App Store. Heather, thank you so much again.
Thank you.